bring Harry and Meghan back into the fold? And what on earth was Sarah Ferguson planning to do with the late Queen's corgis? Clone.
Something is shifting inside the British royal world right now, and it is not coming from a polished palace statement or one of those staged photo ops everyone is used to seeing. No, this is coming from someone who has been watching everything quietly, staying patient, and now, according to multiple insiders, finally getting ready to speak up. Sarah Fergie, the Duchess of York, is sitting on 4 major secrets, and these are not small details you can brush off. These are the kind of revelations that could seriously shake Harry and Meghan's carefully built story. Not just challenge it, but flip the entire narrative that millions of people thought was already settled, locked in, and done. Before we break down those 4 secrets, and yes, we are going deep into every single one, you need to think about something. What happens when someone with real insider access to one of the most private and powerful families in the world gets cornered? Financial pressure, public scrutiny, doors quietly closing. What does that kind of pressure actually create? Because that is exactly where Fergie is standing right now. And when someone holds that much history, that much access, and that much untold information, things can get very real, very fast. That is why this situation matters more than people realize. Stay with this, because by the end, it becomes clear why Harry and Meghan are reportedly more uneasy about Sarah Ferguson than almost anyone else connected to this entire situation. Once you start connecting the dots, the timeline, the relationships, who was close to who and when, you begin to see why this is different. This is not just another royal voice adding commentary. This is someone who was right there, close enough to see what others never could. To really understand why Sarah Ferguson matters right now, you have to look at where she stands in all of this. And her position is something no one else can copy. It sits right in the middle of family ties, long history, and unresolved tension that never fully went away. She's not speaking on behalf of the palace. She is not chasing headlines off second-hand tips. She's not guessing from the outside. She lived it. She was married into the core of the royal family. She raised her daughters inside that world. And even after everything changed, she kept those complicated, long-running connections with the Windsors alive for decades. She's been there for the conversations, the private moments, the decisions, and the relationships the public has never been allowed to see. That is not rumour. That is not guesswork. That is simple reality. It is about where Sarah Ferguson has stood, who she has been around, and how close she has been to the centre of this story the whole time. And that is exactly why her current position feels so explosive. Reports say Ferguson tried to pitch a tell-all memoir to major American publishers, allegedly hoping for a deal worth around $2 million. And what happened? Silence. Some publishers reportedly did not even answer. Others are said to have passed on it almost immediately, with barely any interest at all. Think about that for a second. This is not some random public figure trying to cash in on a headline. This is a former royal duchess, the mother of 2 princesses, a woman whose life has been packed with public drama, personal setbacks, health struggles, money problems, and repeated attempts to rebuild her image. By any normal standard, that is a huge story. So when someone like that cannot even lock in serious interest from a major publisher, it does more than hurt. It raises eyebrows. Because that kind of rejection sends a message. It suggests this story may already be getting boxed in before it even hits the public. Whether that comes from image management, industry caution, or fear of what might come out, the result is the same. The usual doors look shut. But here is where things take a sharper turn. That rejection does not kill the story. It can actually make it more unpredictable. When someone has that much inside knowledge, that much personal history, and that much pressure building behind the scenes, they do not always walk away quietly. Sometimes they start looking for another route, one that is less polished, less controlled, and a lot harder to contain. And that is where the Sussex connection starts looking impossible to ignore. More specifically, it is where the link between Meghan, Princess Eugenie, and the wider flow of information starts to matter in a very serious way. This is the part many people skip over, but it could be one of the biggest pieces of the whole puzzle. Princess Eugenie is Sarah Ferguson's daughter. Everyone knows that part. But what gets far less attention is Eugenie's relationship with Meghan Markle. and what that relationship could mean in the middle of a possible Ferguson memoir or media project. Over the years, reports have painted that bond as real, close, and meaningful. Not just a public-facing friendship, not just something maintained for show. By multiple accounts, Eugenie was one of the very few people in the extended royal circle that Meghan truly trusted. She was often described as a steady and positive presence during Meghan's early time with Harry. And when you look at that connection through the lens of Sarah Ferguson possibly speaking out, the stakes start looking a whole lot bigger. Someone Meghan could turn to in private, someone she could talk to about the pressure closing in, the institutional challenges stacking up, and what life really felt like behind palace doors. Now think about this for a second. When you step into a world that feels completely unfamiliar, where every move is watched and judged, who do you open up to? When the pressure is coming from every direction, and you are trying to figure out who is real and who is not, how much do you actually share with the one person you feel safe with? How much do you say, in those quiet, off-the-record moments that you would never want repeated anywhere else? And how honest do you get when you believe that conversation is locked in, private, and protected? Because when people feel safe, they do not hold back. They speak freely, sometimes emotionally, sometimes without filtering their words. They vent frustrations, they explain situations in raw detail, and they say things they would never say in public. Those private conversations can carry thoughts and feelings that would hit very differently if they ever became public. Now, bring in the family dynamic, because this is where things start to connect in a serious way. In a close family, and by most accounts, that is exactly what Eugenie and Sarah Ferguson have. Conversations flow naturally. Daughters talk to their mothers, not out of betrayal, not with bad intent, but because that is what close families do. Details get shared, opinions get exchanged, little moments get passed along without a second thought. It is normal, it is human, and it happens all the time in families that trust each other. So when you look at the possible flow of information, from Meghan to Eugenie, and then from Eugenie to Ferguson, it stops sounding far-fetched and starts sounding very possible. That potential chain is exactly why people close to this situation are paying attention. Not because of wild rumours, but because of how natural that kind of information flow can be when relationships are that close. And there is another layer here that makes everything even more intense. After Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, Eugenie and her husband, Jack Brooksbank, moved into Frogmore Cottage, the same home Harry and Meghan had lived in and spent heavily renovating. The same space filled with their environment, their choices, their presence. Living there was not just symbolic, it showed a level of trust that goes way beyond surface-level friendship. It points to a connection that was real, consistent, and close during some of the most important moments in this entire situation. So when people talk about what Sarah Ferguson might know, they are not just throwing out random gossip. They are pointing to insight built from real closeness, physical, emotional, and family-level proximity to someone who was right there during the moments that mattered most. Secret number 1, the real story behind the bridesmaid dress drama. Now we are stepping into the first of the 4 secrets, and this is the one that lit everything up and shaped how millions of people see this entire situation. The bridesmaid dress incident did not just make headlines, it drove a very specific version of events straight into the public mindset. You already know the basics. Right before the royal wedding, there was a reported clash between Kate and Meghan over the flower girls' dresses. Meghan later shared her side during the Oprah interview, saying clearly that Kate made her cry and that the media had the story completely flipped. According to Meghan, she was the one hurt, not the one causing the problem. For a lot of people watching, that felt like the final word. Case closed, story corrected. But here is where things start to get messy. Several experienced royal reporters and longtime insiders have since pointed to a more complicated version of events, one where the stories do not fully match up, and the truth is not as clean-cut as it first seemed. Instead of a simple reversal, what starts to show up is a layered situation. Different perspectives, different reactions and gaps that were never fully explained. No neutral party with real access ever stepped forward to confirm exactly what happened in that moment. And that silence matters more than people think. Now bring this back to Sarah Ferguson's position, because this is where things get interesting fast. Princess Eugenie was right there in the inner circle during the wedding build-up. Same spaces, same events, same energy. She was moving through those exact moments, hearing conversations and picking up on details that never made it anywhere near the public. And if Meghan shared her private thoughts with Eugenie during that time, or even after, those conversations could carry very specific details about what actually went down. Not headlines, not summaries, real, detailed accounts that stayed completely behind closed doors. So here is the question that shifts everything. What if the version Meghan shared publicly is only part of the story? What if certain moments, exact words or reactions from others were left out entirely? And what if those missing pieces have been sitting quietly all this time? Because if someone like Sarah Ferguson has insight into those details through her connection with her daughter, that changes the game. If she ever decides to speak, it would not be random guesses or dramatic speculation. It would come from proximity, from real conversations, from trust, from moments that were never meant to leave private space. And that is what makes this different. This is not a tabloid pulling together anonymous tips. This is the possibility of someone speaking from lived closeness, drawing from memories and conversations that have stayed locked away for years, just waiting for the right moment to surface. Secret number 2, the staff complaints and the serious questions about workplace behaviour. This is the one that did not just spark gossip, it triggered real institutional attention at the time. And then, almost just as quickly, it faded out of the spotlight without ever being clearly resolved. Back in 2018, reports surfaced about formal complaints tied to workplace conduct inside the Sussex household. But the details the public got were controlled, limited, and carefully filtered. Official responses from both sides stayed polished and vague. No one admitted to specific wrongdoing, but at the same time nothing was fully explained either. And that is the key point. Those questions never actually went away, they just got quiet. And quiet does not mean settled. What makes this more intense is where Princess Eugenie fits into that timeline. She was part of that same inner circle during that exact period. Close enough to hear different sides, different opinions, and different versions of what was really happening behind the scenes, not just the official story designed for the public, and not just what leaked into headlines. We are talking about private conversations, the kind people have when they feel comfortable speaking honestly, the kind of discussions that happen between friends, between family, between people who are actually living in that environment day to day. Because royal households are not like normal workplaces. They are tight, high-pressure spaces where personal and professional lines blur. Staff members see things, hear things, and experience dynamics that the outside world rarely gets access to. And in those settings, what is said privately can look very different from what gets presented publicly. So if Sarah Ferguson ever decides to revisit this period in detail, through a memoir or any kind of media project, she would not just be repeating old headlines. She could be drawing from perspectives that have never been part of the public record at all. And right now, in a world where workplace behaviour is taken more seriously than ever, where public figures face intense scrutiny, and where institutions are expected to be fully transparent, that kind of information carries serious weight. It does not just create noise, it can shift how people are viewed in a lasting way. Because once a reputation takes a hit at that level, it is not easy to fix. Public perception can change fast, but rebuilding it can take years, sometimes even longer. Secret number 3, when the decision to leave may have really started. This could be the biggest one yet, because it has the power to change how people look back on this entire chapter of royal history. The public version of the Sussex exit has long been framed as a reaction to pressure building over time. The story, as Harry and Meghan have presented it, points to growing institutional strain, lack of support, and a media environment they said became impossible to live under. In that version, stepping back happened as events got worse and the situation reached a breaking point. But another version of this story has been floating around for years, and it tells things very differently. That version suggests the move may have started much earlier than the public was led to believe, not as a sudden response, but as something that may have already been quietly taking shape behind the scenes. The suggestion is that real planning may have been happening well before the official announcement ever landed. Conversations about where to go, who to work with, and how the money side of life outside the royal system could work may have already been in motion. Even some accounts that lean in Harry and Meghan's favour have quietly hinted that preparations seem to begin earlier than the public timeline suggested. And that matters a lot, because if the exit was already being discussed, mapped out, and carefully thought through while they were still carrying out royal duties, then the story looks very different. At that point, it is not just a reaction to events. It starts to look more like a strategy, a planned transition already underway while a different picture was still being shown in public. That would change the meaning of everything around that period. They were still attending official events, still making appearances, still representing the crown in public. So, if private plans to leave were already developing during that same time, then the timeline people were given may not tell the full story. And this is exactly where Princess Eugenie becomes so important. She was close to Harry and Meghan during that exact window. By many accounts, she was one of the people they trusted most. That means if any early thoughts, private concerns, or even rough plans were shared with her, even casually, then there may be details sitting outside the public record that point to a very different sequence of events. Now imagine what happens if that information ever comes out through someone in Sarah Ferguson's position. That would not just create another round of royal drama, it could seriously challenge the timeline the public was given and raise bigger questions about how this whole departure was presented to the institution, to the public, and to the world. Secret number 4, the social circles and the connections nobody really wants to talk about. This is easily the most sensitive one, the most layered, and the one that could carry serious consequences depending on how deep it goes. Before everything shifted, before the Netflix series, before the Oprah interview, before all the public fallout, Meghan and Princess Eugenie were moving in some of the same high-level social spaces in London. We are talking about exclusive private members' clubs, tightly controlled events, and elite gatherings where powerful people from business, entertainment, politics, and philanthropy all mixed in close quarters. These were not casual environments. These were networks built on access, influence, and connections that often stayed behind closed doors. And over time, some of those circles have come under heavy public and legal scrutiny. Not always because of clear wrongdoing in every case, but because of who was connected to who and how those relationships looked when examined later. Now here is where things get uncomfortable. The name Jeffrey keeps coming up around these discussions, whether people like it or not. Not as a direct accusation toward everyone in those circles, but because his network overlapped with a number of high-profile figures across those same elite spaces. That overlap has been examined again and again through investigations, reporting, and legal action. Prince Andrew's connection to Epstein is already well documented. His association, the legal case brought by Virginia Giuffre, and the settlement that followed had a lasting impact on his role and public image. That part is no secret. But what gets talked about far less is the wider question of shared social environments. Who met through which circle? Who crossed paths at which event? And how close those overlaps actually were during that time? At one point, Virginia Giuffre's legal team reportedly considered Meghan Markle as a potential witness in relation to Prince Andrew. The suggestion was not about direct claims, but about whether her social proximity to certain circles could offer relevant insight. That alone raised serious eyebrows because it pointed to how interconnected these environments may have been. And yet, here is the detail that really stands out. Despite all the public criticism Harry and Meghan have directed at various members of the royal family, across interviews, documentaries, and even in a memoir, they have never publicly criticised Prince Andrew. Not once, not directly, not even in passing. And that silence feels loud, especially when you consider how openly they have spoken on other difficult and personal issues. They have shown they are willing to address conflict, call out behaviour, and share uncomfortable truths. So why not here? What explains that gap? Why stay completely quiet on one of the most controversial figures tied to the royal family, while speaking so freely about others? That question does not come with an easy answer. But it is exactly why this fourth piece stands out so much. Because sometimes what is not said can raise just as many questions as what is. Silence like that tends to speak for itself. It creates questions that no official statement can fully shut down, no matter how carefully it is worded, and this is exactly where Sarah Ferguson's position starts to feel even more intense. She was married to Prince Andrew. She stayed in contact with him for years after their divorce. That connection alone places her close to conversations, environments, and moments that are now being looked at with serious attention. And this is not some distant link. This is personal history, layered and complicated, tied to a story that keeps resurfacing, no matter how often people try to move past it. If she chooses to speak, and she has shown before that she's not afraid to do that when others stay quiet, this is the area where the pressure really builds, not just because of what she might directly say, but because of the questions her perspective naturally brings with it. And in today's media climate, a well-placed question from someone with real proximity can hit just as hard as a clear statement, sometimes even harder. Now shift the focus to something just as important, motivation, because this is not only about what Ferguson knows, it is about what she might decide to do with that information and why that decision could look very different now compared to the past. Reports have described her current situation as unstable in several ways. No formal royal role, no strong institutional backing, charitable connections that have reportedly pulled away after renewed public attention, business efforts that have struggled or failed to fully take off, an ongoing financial pressure that keeps coming up again and again. There have even been reports placing Ferguson in high-end wellness locations in Switzerland where the costs are extremely high. Other accounts describe a lifestyle involving borrowed homes, private villas, and luxury retreats. On the surface, it looks polished, but underneath it raises real questions about long-term stability. And this is where the mindset shift happens. When someone still has a role to protect, when they are backed by an institution, when their position depends on staying quiet, they calculate every move carefully. They think about risk, reputation, and what they could lose. But what happens when most of that is already gone? When the support fades, the deals fall through, the doors close, and the financial pressure keeps building? At that point, the calculation flips completely. There is less to hold on to and fewer reasons to stay silent. The risk starts to look different, and so does the reward. And here is why people are watching this so closely. This is not new territory for Fergie. There is history here. Back in 1996, after her divorce, she was already in a position where speaking out came with consequences, and she did it anyway. She went ahead and published a memoir that reportedly caused real, lasting damage to relationships inside royal circles. And the key detail? She knew the backlash was coming before it even hit, and she chose to move forward anyway. That tells you something very clearly. She is not afraid to speak when others in her position might stay quiet. She has already shown on record that she can take the fallout and keep going. That kind of pattern matters, especially now. And while all of that has been unfolding, she has been watching Harry and Meghan land massive deals, Netflix, Spotify, a best-selling memoir, all built around telling their version of events. A story she was, in many ways, even closer to than they were. You don't need a direct quote from Ferguson to understand how that might feel. The situation speaks for itself. Watching others turn shared history into global deals, that alone is enough to shift how someone thinks about their own story and what it might be worth. According to people closely following this, Ferguson has been studying that exact strategy. The same playbook Harry and Meghan used to turn their experiences into major media success. And now, there are strong suggestions she is ready, or at least very close to making a move of her own. And that playbook is no secret anymore. Start with a major attention-grabbing interview. Build momentum through streaming platforms where the audience keeps growing. Then land a high-impact book deal when the public is already fully locked in and waiting. It is a system that works. And Ferguson has something powerful to bring into it: access, proximity, and a long history filled with moments that have never been fully explained. Now here is where a lot of people get it wrong. The rejection from major American publishers does not shut this down. It actually opens new paths. Because when a story gets pushed out of the traditional system, it does not disappear. It moves, and once it starts moving through less controlled channels, it can become a lot harder to predict and a lot harder to contain. there are still plenty of options on the table. The UK publishing world, for example, operates very differently. Different business models, different legal boundaries, and a completely different relationship with royal stories. A British publisher would look at Ferguson's situation through a totally different lens than a publisher in New York. And that difference alone could change everything about how and where this story finally gets told. International markets across Europe, Australia, Canada, and beyond are all still wide open. These are powerful platforms where a story like this could land hard and spread fast, without needing any approval from the American publishers who passed the first time. And let's be real, streaming platforms are hungry for exactly this kind of content. High-profile personal stories, global recognition, built-in curiosity from the public. A well-produced documentary, a limited series, or even one exclusive feature can explode worldwide almost overnight. We are talking about attention levels in 72 hours that traditional books sometimes take months to build. Then there is the interview route, which might be the fastest hit of all. One carefully timed sit-down with the right journalist or broadcaster, pushed across major platforms, can dominate headlines instantly. That kind of exposure can match or even outpace what a full memoir rollout would normally achieve over a long stretch. So the reality is simple. The $2 million American deal may be off the table, but that was just one option, one door. And there are still plenty of others standing wide open, some of them leading to even bigger opportunities. That is why people watching this closely are not asking if Ferguson will speak. That part almost feels expected at this point. The real questions are where, when, and how. Because those details change everything. They determine how much warning anyone else gets, how much time there is to prepare a response, whether there is space to manage the fallout, or if it all hits at once with no time to react. Now bring this back to Harry and Meghan, because this is where the impact becomes very real. Since stepping away, they have built a very specific public identity. Their version of events, what happened, why they left, how they were treated, sits at the center of everything they have created. The Netflix series, the Oprah interview, the memoir, these are not just media moments. They are the foundation of their entire narrative. Their brand, their deals, their public image, it all connects back to that core story. And that story depends on something important. It depends on there not being a strong, credible, close-up alternative version circulating at the same level. Right now, that condition mostly holds. The dominant narrative out there is the one Harry and Meghan have shared themselves. Other voices with real proximity have stayed quiet, whether by choice, pressure, or circumstance. But imagine what happens if that changes. If someone with real closeness, family ties, shared spaces, private conversations, steps forward with a different perspective that feels just as credible, that is when the balance shifts. Because once a competing narrative enters the same space with real weight behind it, the story is no longer one-sided, and when that happens, everything people thought was settled suddenly feels a lot less certain. This does not just create a quick headline that fades in a week, it creates something much bigger. It creates comparison, and once people start comparing stories, everything changes. At that point, the audience is not just sitting back and listening anymore, they are actively picking things apart, looking at timelines, spotting gaps, asking why certain moments were presented in a specific way and why others might have been left out completely. And once that kind of thinking starts, it does not just stop halfway. People keep digging until they feel like they have reached some kind of answer. That is where things get risky for any narrative that has been carefully shaped over time, because the real pressure does not always come from someone directly saying, "This is false." It comes from something more subtle and sometimes more powerful. It comes from new details, credible ones, that slowly make the original story feel incomplete, or even strategically put together. That shift is hard to control once it begins, and according to reports, there are already signs that this risk is being taken seriously behind the scenes. Legal options are said to be under consideration in certain royal circles before anything even comes out. That kind of move is not made over small concerns. It usually means there is a belief that something significant could surface, something strong enough that waiting and reacting later feels too dangerous. And just the fact that this is even being discussed sends a message. It shows how seriously Ferguson's potential move is being viewed by people close to the situation. Now step back and look at the bigger picture, because this is where it gets even harder to manage. Once a situation like this gains real momentum, it does not stay simple. It does not stay as one story versus another. It turns into multiple narratives all moving at the same time. Different perspectives, different timelines, different people, all with their own version of what happened, each one sounding convincing in its own way. Harry and Meghan have their version, the one they have spent years building, shaping and sharing with the world. The royal institution has its own approach, more controlled, more reserved, focused on stability and image. And then there is Sarah Ferguson, connected to both sides through family, history and long-term relationships. That puts her in a unique position, holding a perspective that could overlap with both stories in ways no one can fully predict. And when those narratives start colliding in public, things do not unfold neatly. They spiral. One detail sparks a new question. That question demands answers. Those answers open up new angles. And suddenly, what started as one story turns into 5 at once, each one feeding into the next, clashing, overlapping, and pulling attention in every direction all at once. This is not just a passing news cycle, it is something much heavier, something that sticks and becomes harder to shake over time. And anyone who has been watching this situation closely already knows that when it comes to Harry and Meghan, the public space is highly charged. There's a large group of people who fully support their version of events and are not likely to change their minds, no matter what comes out. And on the other side, there is another group that has questioned their story from the start, and will take any new angle as confirmation of what they already believe. But here is the key part. Someone like Sarah Ferguson is not likely to flip either of those groups completely. That is not where the real impact is. The real shift happens in the middle. The people who are not fully committed either way, the ones who pay attention to details, who weigh different perspectives, and who adjust their views based on what feels most credible. That middle ground is where reputations are shaped for the long term. That is where public perception settles, and that is exactly where a new, credible voice could have the biggest effect. Now let's be clear about where things actually stand right now. Nothing official has dropped yet. No confirmed deal, no announced interview, no streaming project revealed. The biggest version of this story has not hit the public, at least not yet. But everything that usually comes before a major moment like this, that is in place. The source is there. The potential material is there. The motivation appears strong. Financial pressure has been widely reported. The traditional publishing route has already been tested and rejected, which often pushes stories into new directions, and those alternative paths are still wide open. Streaming platforms, international publishing markets, exclusive interviews with major broadcasters, all of these options are still fully on the table and ready to move fast. So the real question has never been whether Sarah Ferguson has something important to say. It has always been about timing, platform, and readiness. Because once those pieces line up, that is when everything can change fast. And here is the reality of today's media world. Personal stories from people with real royal connections can generate massive global attention and huge money. Platforms compete hard for that kind of content because the audience is already there, waiting. One well-timed interview from the right person on the right platform can shift public opinion almost instantly. And in a story like this, that kind of moment does not just make noise, it can reshape how everything is seen going forward. All the pieces are already on the table, and this does not feel far off anymore. It feels like a matter of timing, the right deal, and the right moment to strike. Those 4 secrets, the real story behind the bridesmaid dress drama, the unanswered staff conduct questions, the true timeline of when the exit plan actually began, and those complicated social circle connections nobody powerful wants to dig into, are not gone. They are sitting in private memory right now, shaped by years of closeness, trust, and real family conversations between a mother and her daughter. And the person holding all of that, she has been here before. She has faced pressure, taken the hit, and still chosen to speak. She knows what comes with it, and she has already proven she can handle the fallout. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan have built their entire public image around one key idea, that they control the narrative. They decide what gets told, how it is presented, and when the world hears it. But Sarah Ferguson may be getting ready to challenge that in a big way, because proximity is power. The people who are actually there, the ones in the room, in the conversations, inside the real moments, do not always stay silent forever. Sometimes they wait, and then they speak when it matters most. So keep your eyes on this, because the second something drops, it could all start moving fast. Really fast. If this gave you something to think about, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to see it. And drop your thoughts in the comments below.